I am so excited for today's watercolor painting that I'm not even going to do a big introduction or anything. We are just going to jump right in, but trust me, you are going to love this one. I'm just getting my supplies ready here. I have watercolor paints, some clean water, a paper towel, and of course some watercolor paper. Now, I'm going to be using an outline drawing for this piece today. However, there is some of it that can be done freehanded as well. So let me show you what we have going on here. Now, all of the flowers on this piece could actually be painted in freehanded if that's what you like to do. You can also just draw them in, so whatever you're comfortable with. I do recommend, if you choose to do the flowers freehanded though, to at least draw in the book portion so you have something to work with. You can try drawing this for yourself, or you can go to my Etsy shop and simply print it out and trace it onto your watercolor paper using a light table or even just a well-lit window in your house. And like I say, you can choose to draw just the book or the book and the flowers, whatever you'd like to do. Now let's go ahead and pull out a few brushes that we can use for this piece today. I'm going to be using my 5-piece Craftamo set here. I think I'll pull out the number 6 round, the number 3 round, and the number 1 rigger. I'll go ahead and just tape my paper down really quickly with some artist tape, but as a side note, I will leave links and information for any of the supplies you see me using today in the description of this video, including my Etsy shop as well as my Craftamo brushes. Now, one last thing I'm going to do to this piece, which is optional, but I'm planning to have a lot of this painting lighter in value, and I don't want these pencil marks showing too much. So I'm going to take a kneaded eraser and just roll that up like a hot dog and then roll it across my page. This is just going to take off some of the loose graphite so my drawing isn't quite so dark. Later, I realized maybe I shouldn't have done this on mine for this video because it may make it harder for you to see as the viewer, but hopefully you'll still get the idea of what we're doing here. All right, first up, we need to get a few colors ready on our tray. We'll start with some of the background washes of this piece first, and then work our way to more of the details. So using the number 6 round brush, I'll pull out some burnt umber, some raw sienna, and some Payne's gray. Now I'll just take a touch of water and paint in a nice, loose, fluffy looking shadow area underneath the book. Once as the area is wet, we can go ahead and start dropping in our colors. I'm going to work my way from the lighter colors to the darker colors, so I'll start with the raw sienna at the very bottom edge. Now I'll take the burnt umber and begin adding that into the space, blending it in with the raw sienna and moving up towards the base of the book. And lastly, we'll take the Payne's gray, painting that right in at the very edge of the book, making this the darkest spot of the shadow. All right, very good. Let's go ahead and move up into a light wash on the pages of the book next. I'll start this out again with a little bit of water first, painting across the top of the page here, maybe just going around this little flower that overlaps. And then I'm also going to add in an extra splash moving off the page into the background area just for fun. Now that we have this area all watered down, let's go ahead and drop a bit of color in there. I'm actually going to keep this pretty light in value though. I only just want a hint of color in there. I might even try a mix of the raw sienna and burnt umber, and I will have it slightly watered down. Again, I'll go around the flower in this section, and as a side tip, if you need to lighten up some of the colors or even soften some of the hard edges, you can use your paper towel and just dab some of that off. Okay, very good. While this is all still a little bit wet, let's just blend in a tiny bit of Payne's gray here and there that can represent some loose shadows. We are making good progress here. So let's go ahead and paint in the other side of the book in the same way. Again, just keeping it fairly light in value. We only just need a hint of color here. I hope you are enjoying the tutorial so far. I try to create tutorials so that there's something for everyone. I have a lot of simple beginner-friendly tutorials as well as paintings that might challenge you just a bit. So make sure you subscribe if you like my painting and teaching style so you won't miss out on any of my new and upcoming weekly tutorials. Okay, let's paint a light background wash around the flower stems next. I will pull out some olive green as well as freshen up the raw sienna and burnt umber. We'll paint this wet on wet as well. So I'll just take some water and paint that around where the flower stems are going to be, just to add a little bit of color to the background. And I am going to be painting around some of these large flowers here as well. Now we'll take some of those paint colors and begin adding that in. I'll start with the olive green first, painting around some of the flowers, and maybe even painting these in with lines or stripes that could represent loose or distant stems or leaves in the background. Although I'm trying to keep this mostly green, I may throw in a little bit of raw sienna in here, or maybe some burnt umber just to change things up a little bit. The good news is that this does not have to be anything fancy or special. We're literally just adding some color in the background, and we will be painting darker colors over the top of this in just a minute, so don't stress too much. All right, I think that's good enough. Let's go ahead and jump back down to the book next, and we are going to paint in the front portions of the pages using some of these same colors. So I'm going to start this again with a wash of water. You can see that there's a little bit of color still in my brush, and that's okay. We are going to be painting over the top of this as well. So after you've got some water on here, then we can go ahead and add in some more color. I'm just going to use a mixture of that raw sienna and burnt umber again. This time I'm going to want to make it a little bit darker in value than the top of the book pages. And I might even try painting this color in using some horizontal stripes just to go with the flow of the book and to help represent those pages. While this is still wet, I'm also going to take a bit of that Payne's gray and just add a slight amount here to create a bit of shadow. I think that looks pretty good, but I do feel like it's not quite dark enough, so I may darken that up just a little bit, maybe using a slightly more heavy amount of the burnt umber this time. Very good. I like that better. So let's go ahead and do that same thing on the other side. Okay, we are going to let that dry just a little bit, and then once as it is, we can come back in here and add in a little bit of detail. So while we wait for that to finish drying, let's go ahead and mix up a color that we can use for the cover of the book next. And you can choose any color that you like for this. I think I'm going to make mine more on the reddish side of things, so I'm going to take a little bit of cadmium red and mix it with some burnt umber. When your painting feels fairly dry, then we can go ahead and start painting in the cover of the book next. I'm going to be using the number 3 round since this is a much smaller space here. But I'll just take a little bit of water first and just paint in this first little section with water, and then I'll go ahead and add in that darker red color that we mixed up. I am going to want the sides of the cover to be fairly light in value, so it almost looks like it's disappearing into the background, but as we move towards the front part of the cover, I'll have that be just a little bit darker in value. And it's just that easy. We'll go ahead and finish painting in the rest of the cover in a similar way. I'm just going to pull out a hairdryer really quickly and just dry everything off at this point so I can keep working without having anything blur together. But as I've been looking at this, I do kind of feel like I need some darker shadow right under the center part of the book here. So I'm just going to take a little bit of ivory black and just place that right under the binding or center part of the book, and then fade that out to create a slightly darker shadow area. Sometimes it helps to, after you put the color on, to rinse and dry your brush off and then use the damp brush to sort of blend and spread that out. Now using some ivory black or some Payne's gray or even a mixture of one of those with some burnt umber, let's just paint in a nice dark section here in this little open space of the book. Then to add a little bit more detail in the book pages, I'll water that color down just a little bit, which is the mix of ivory black and burnt umber, just so that it's not too dark in value. And then using the number 3 round brush, I'll paint in a few stripes or lines of color amongst the pages just to make them look a little bit more realistic. I'll also add some dark color right here at the base of the pages to create a shadow in the gaps. And one last thing to finish off the look of the book, I'll add a very slight amount of color off to the right side of the pages. Not too much, this is pretty light in value. We just need a hint so we can see it there. Okay, very good. That's actually a huge portion of this painting done, and all that's left to do is paint in the flowers and the greenery, and this is the part that you could paint this in free-handed if you'd rather. All of these flowers are fairly simple, nothing too fancy, but it really does finish off the look of this piece. I'll go ahead and mix up a few colors here. First, I have our olive green like we've been using before. I'm also going to create a slightly cooler green by mixing Hooker's green with some olive green. This way they can be fairly similar and yet slightly different as well. I'm also going to pull out some Quinacridone rose for some of the flower petals, as well as some mineral violet. Again, you could actually choose different colors if you want to, just whatever you want to try. Now using the number 3 round brush, I'll take a little bit of that purple paint and I'll just paint in a few of these flowers. I'll start with this little bud, and all I'm doing here is painting in a few simple strokes just to fill that out. Then I'll move on to this little flower down here. Again, I'll paint these flower petals just using a few strokes of the brush to kind of fill out the space. And if you feel like going the extra mile and you'd like to give this a bit of extra dimension, you can take a slightly darker purple, like some dioxazine purple, for example, and just add a very slight amount right at the center part of the petal while it's still wet, and then let that blend and spread. That is optional, but I do think it gives the flowers a little bit of extra dimension. All right, very good. That flower turned out great. And before I'm done with the purple, I might just paint in a couple more flowers here, again using some very simple strokes of the brush. I have a small flower right next to this larger one, and I will also be painting in some lavender as well in the background. For the lavender, these are literally just some spots or dabs of color that I move along down the stem. Again, nothing too difficult or complicated. Okay, very good. Now moving on, why don't we paint in some pink flowers next? I'll be using the Quinacridone rose for these, and I will be painting them in pretty much the same way, using just a few strokes of the brush to fill in each petal space, and then maybe adding a slightly darker or more concentrated color, such as alizarin crimson, for example, at the very center part of the flower to create a bit of depth and shadow. That looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and paint in the largest flower right in the center of the book next. I'll be painting this again in the same way using the Quinacridone rose and then the alizarin crimson as the shadow in the center. But since this is a larger flower, I am going to be switching over to the number 6 round brush this time. I have one more flower over here that I think I'll just go ahead and paint this with the pink color. I do have a few petals overlapping on this one though, so I may just do 3 of the petals and then let them dry, and then we'll come back in and finish off the rest of the petals in just a minute. Once as those first 3 petals are dry, then we can go ahead and paint in the rest of them and just finish this cute little flower off. All right, well done. All we have left are some really small little flowers, so I'll switch back over to the number 3 round brush. Some of these are just little buds, and some of them look more like open-facing flowers, so I'll just paint those in here, keeping them fairly light in value. And in fact, you'll notice that I actually take my paper towel and dab off a bit of color here, because initially I felt like they were too dark. But you can always do that if you feel like you need to. Since these are more in the background, I just wanted to lighten them up a little bit more. Okay, just a couple of finishing touches on these flowers, and then we can move on to the greenery. We are just about done here, so I'm going to pull out a little bit of yellow for this next part. I might even paint a small bud here to add a slight change of color into these flowers. So I'll start with some azo yellow first, and then I'll take a touch of either some raw sienna or some yellow ochre to add a tiny bit of shadow in there while that initial paint is still wet. I'm going to use that same color combination for the centers of the open flowers as well, the azo yellow as the overall color, and then the yellow ochre as a bit of shadow at the very base. Okay, all that's left is to paint in the greenery. So using the small number 3 round brush, maybe I'll start with some olive green and just paint in some areas right under the flower heads. Now I can go ahead and take some olive green color and begin painting in some leaves that surround these flowers. I'm also going to be using the other green as well, so I'll make sure to leave a few leaves that I can paint with that other green in a minute, but I'll start off with this olive green first, and it might even be fun with both of these green colors to have some slightly lighter in value and some slightly darker in value, just to give this some variation and interest. Okay, I think that's good enough for the olive green color. So let's go ahead and switch over to the hooker's green that's mixed with the olive green next, and just finish off painting in any more leaves that are in the empty spaces here. After I've had a chance to look at this, I decided I may need to add in some slightly darker shadow colors into the centers of these flowers. So maybe I'll use a bit of raw umber this time and emphasize that just a little bit more before we move on. In fact, while I'm at it, I might even add some small centers to the open facing flowers that are here in the background as well. All right, well done. The last thing that we need to do is finish painting in the thin stem lines for these flowers, moving from the flower heads to the center of the book. I think I'll just use the olive green for this, but you can choose whichever green color you like. And then to keep the lines nice and thin, I like to really load my brush by rolling the side of it around in the paint color. And then I'll just gently dab the bristles onto my paper towel to take off some of the excess. And that way I can keep my lines nice and thin, but my brush is still loaded. This looks pretty good, but I do feel like I have more empty spaces in here than I'd like. So I may take my number 3 round brush and some really light watered down olive green paint and just add in a few extra leaves here and there into the background just to fill out any of those empty spaces a little bit better. And for the final finishing touch, which actually is optional, I'm going to pull out that rigger brush once again and add in some center vein lines into all of these leaves. And actually, before I put that rigger brush down, let's also take some pink and purple colors and add in some thin lines throughout the flower petals as well. Great job, my friends. Isn't this such a pretty little piece? It definitely takes some time to do, but it's not really that hard, and the outcome is fantastic. This is one of my new favorites. I know I say that all the time, but it is so true. When your entire painting is completely dry, then this is when you can come back in here with a good eraser and erase any of those leftover pencil lines that you might still be able to see. They probably won't all come off, but it definitely helps. And that, my friends, is actually it for this piece. It turned out so beautiful. I cannot wait for you to give this a try. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had some fun and maybe even learned something new. If you did enjoy this tutorial, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel so I can continue to help you discover your artistic side.